Hello everyone! I am so excited to share this tutorial with you guys. Thank you so much for purchasing this pattern. I had a really hard time writing out the pattern, so that's why I figured I'm gonna make a video tutorial because I want to be absolutely sure that you guys can follow along and also make one of these really cool cowls like I have right here. My screen is gonna overexpose a little bit because of all the black in this, but here you see what it's going to look like once it's done. I think they're so much fun. I think the pattern is quite unusual. Because of the stitch is really warm and thick, it creates like a padded crocheted cowl pretty much. So just follow along and I'll show you how to make this. It really isn't all that difficult once you get the stitch pattern, but it really will be tricky in the beginning. But that's why I think a video is perfect, because when you can follow along what someone's doing, there isn't all that much that can go wrong anymore, because you can just pause, go back and check again and compare your work against what I'm doing right here. So just keep on watching and I'll show you how to make this cowl. Good luck! So obviously you're going to need some yarn and you're going to need a crochet hook. Now here I'm using a 6mm crochet hook, and the yarn I'm using is a worsted weight yarn. Now the hook size recommended for this yarn is a 4mm hook, but because we're making so many puff stitches, I'd recommend going up quite a bit. So I went up from a 4mm to a 6mm hook, which is 2 entire millimeters up. And I think that is a perfect hook size for this cowl pattern, because the stitches are nice and puffy, nothing is too tight, and so I definitely recommend going up a couple of sizes than you normally would use for the yarn you're going to use. So I definitely recommend a worsted weight yarn. The moment you start using like chunky weight yarns, it gets a bit, well, first of all, you probably have to reduce the amount of stitches you're going to make in this cowl, because it will be too big, unless you want a really big cowl. And also you will really have to go up quite another couple of hook sizes, because the puff stitches will all become too dense and you will have pretty much a block of crochet that won't shape around your neck anymore. And that's why I'd recommend using a worsted weight yarn. I think that's perfect for this pattern, but feel free to try anything else. You can also hold 2 strands of a thinner weight yarn together. It's all up to you. But for this tutorial, I went with a worsted weight yarn, and that's also why I've chosen the amount of chains that I've chosen to begin with, to create a size that I think is perfectly nice and warm around your neck. I don't like my cowls to be too loose, but also not too tight, because I don't like the feeling of stuff pressing against my neck. That's why I think a chain of 54 is absolutely perfect for this project. And that is exactly what we're going to start with. So it's going to start really easy. If you know how to crochet, you know how to make a chain. So I just start by making a slip knot, and then loosely, and I cannot emphasize this enough, you do not want to make this chain too tight. So I literally already pull a little bit on the first one before I even make my next chain. So that's 1, 2. Now I'm not going to show you how to make 54 chains, because I'm sure you can do that. So I'll meet you at the end, and then I'll show you what to do next. And keep in mind, keep these chains loose. I'm not talking like this loose, but I'm talking like, instead of all the way against your hook, have a little bit of breathing room there. And also when you pull it through, pull it out just a little bit more every time. Good luck, I'll see you in a bit. Alright, so I've made my 54 chains. And now we're going to join this by making a slip stitch into the first one without twisting our chain, because we want to make this into a circle, but we don't want to mess up our chain. So I always have a look. I start at the beginning, and then I like put my fingers along it, so I take out all the twists and turns. So I keep feeling that I'm not turning anything. And once I reach the end, so I'm almost there, I know that I've got a completely flat chain from my last loop on the hook. Then I'll turn it. So now I've got it like this. And now I'm going to go into that very first chain, underneath 2 loops, right there, go in, grab my working yarn again, and make a slip stitch. So now we've got a loop. There we go. The loop still doesn't look very big, but the moment we start making our puff stitches, it will expand a little bit. And at the very end, you just like shape your work a little bit and it will stay in that position. Alright, so we've got our tail end here, which obviously we're not going to use. So let's start. The first round is still very easy. We're going to just chain 2, and now you are going to make half double crochet stitches into each chain across. Now we're going to skip the first one because we already make the chain 2, which is the first half double crochet stitch. At least it counts as one. And then we're going to go into the next one and make a half double crochet stitch. Now if you don't know what a half double crochet stitch is, I'd recommend you go to our channel because we've got a tutorial for the half double crochet stitch as well. You can also keep looking. So I just yarn over once, go into the next stitch, grab the yarn and pull it through. Now I've got 3 loops on my hook, yarn over and pull it through all the loops on my hook. There we go. That's a half double crochet. So we started with 54 chains. There's already 3 stitches here, which means I've got 51 half double crochets left to make. Once I'm at the very end, I will get back to you and I will show you what to do next. Alright, so I've made I've got 54 stitches now, including the chain 2 at the beginning. Now, before I make my slip stitch, I need to check if everything is still untwisted. So there we go, which means I can now go ahead and make my slip stitch in the top of the initial chain 2, which I'm going to do right here. Alright, there we go. So now I've got my first circle. This is where the fun is going to start now. So I'm going to start, and the pattern will say the same, is start by chaining 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now from now on your chains don't have to be as loose anymore as in the very beginning. You just make 5 normal chains, like I just did. This counts as a double crochet. The first 3 chains count as a double crochet, and the next 2 are just 2 chains, and this will come back in the entire pattern every time. Now we're going to look at our work. So this was the chain 2 that we started with. That was 1 half double crochet. So this is the first stitch. This would be the next stitch that you would normally crochet into, which would be right there. Instead of working our first stitch to the left, we are going to work the other way. So the stitch before is this one right there. You see that? And that's the stitch we're going to work into right now. We are going to make a puff stitch into that stitch right there. Now don't look at this. This is the slip stitch you've made, and these are the chains that you've started with. So the actual stitch that you're going to use, the loops you're going to go underneath, are those 2 right there, because they belong to that last stitch you've made before you slip stitched. So now you're going to make a puff stitch, which means you're going to yarn over, you're going to go into that stitch. Let me just try and get that clear for you guys. So you can see right next to my thumb, that's where I'm going to go in. And I'm going to grab the yarn and pull a loop all the way up, like this. That's 1. Yarn over again, and I always like to hold this yarn here with my finger. Go into the same stitch again, grab the yarn, and pull it up again. Now you've got a lot of loops already on your hook, so you've done it twice now. You're going to yarn over again, you're going to go into that same stitch again, and pull up another loop. And now we're going to do that one more time. Yarn over, into that stitch, the same stitch, and pull up another loop. Now you've got a lot of loops on your hook. I've never actually counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 loops on your hook. You're now going to grab the yarn and pull it through 8 of those loops, so you have 2 loops left on your hook. Grab the yarn again and pull it through those 2 loops. You've now finished your puff stitch. And here, on the right now of that puff stitch, is that chain 5 that you started with. And it is very good to remember. It will always be hugging your puff stitch. Alright, now the next one. So let's look at our work. We made our first puff stitch into this stitch, which is one stitch behind where we started. This is where we started, above that stitch. Now we're going to skip that stitch where we started, because there was already our chain 5 coming out of. We're going to skip the next stitch as well, and into the next stitch, which is right here. So let's look again. This is the first one, second one. We're going to skip both of these, and then we're going to go into this one. Now the loops of a stitch are always a little bit behind the stitch. So in this case, this space belongs to this stitch. So I've yarned over because we're going to make a double crochet into that stitch, right there. So I'm going to double crochet and chain 2, 1, 2. So this is what we've done. This is where we started, above this first stitch. We made chain 5, we made a puff stitch, one stitch behind that, then we skipped that stitch and the next stitch, and then we made our double crochet into the next stitch, and then we made a chain 2. Now we're going to repeat this pattern of puff stitching and making a double crochet. So now I'm going to yarn over, and now because we have a stitch that is not worked yet, which is this stitch right here, we are going to make our puff stitch into that stitch. And now I'm trying to look through the camera screen, so it's a little difficult. Let me see, yes. So now you're going to make one of those puff stitches again, which means you're always going to go in 4 times. So I just did 1, yarn over, 2, 3, 4. Grab the yarn, pull it through the first 8 loops, or you can also see it as through all the loops except for 1. Yarn over and pull through those last 2 loops. Now you've made another puff stitch. So we've got 2 already. Already you can see they start to slant a little to the left. Now let's look at our work again. We're going to skip the next stitch, which is this one. Well, first of all, this one, and it's hard to see now, has already been worked because we made our double crochet into this space right here. This space belongs to this stitch. And if you pull this apart a little, you can see that that's where the double crochet comes out of. It is now going into that puff stitch and coming out on the other side because we started working behind ourselves. So this one has already been worked. So then we're going to skip the next stitch, and we're going to use the next stitch to make our double crochet. So this one already has the double crochet in it that we made before the puff stitch. This one we're going to skip, and then we're going to work into this one. So yarn over and double crochet into that stitch. Just like that. Chain 2. You will always chain 2 after a double crochet. And now we have this skipped stitch to work our next puff stitch. Now every once in a while just make sure that you understand your stitches. So for example, the reason we can only use this stitch right here is because first of all this one we just came out of, so we just made our double crochet. And this one, even though it's hard to tell, has already been worked as well, because you can see here a double crochet is coming out of this stitch, which means you only have this stitch right there to work into. So now we're going to make our puff stitch into that stitch, because it's the only one that's available to us at the moment. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yarn over, go to all the loops except for 1, and finish off your puff stitch. And now we're going to keep repeating this. So again, it's maybe a little more clear this time. This stitch has already been worked. We made our double crochet into that stitch. Then we're going to skip the next one, and then we're going to make a double crochet into the next one. Yarn over, and here is where our double crochet is going to go. Just like that. And now remember, chain 2. I'm going to show you again, because I think that's easier than you pausing every time and going back. yarn over, and again we have only one option. That's the stitch behind the one we're coming out of right now, which is right here. So yarn over, and I'm going to go into that stitch and make my puff stitch. So I just went in once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, pull through all but one, pull through, and you finished another puff stitch. And again, we're going to skip this stitch and go to the next one. So we skip, first of all, the stitch with the double crochet, skip the next one, and then we're going to work our double crochet into the next one. Double crochet, chain 2, and now we can make our next puff stitch, which again, there's only one space, which is right there. So I hope this is clear for you guys. This is still not the end, because the next row is going to be a little different than this one again. So keep on going in this manner until we're almost at the end, and then I'll get back to you to show you how to finish off this row. So good luck, and if you have any questions at this point already, I would just pause and go back a little and have a look again at the very beginning of this, the moment I start making my puff stitches. Because after a while you will understand how the system works. So you will always work over 2 stitches. So for example, whenever you make a double crochet here, your puff stitch will go into the one behind that. Then you will skip that stitch and the next stitch, and then you will make a double crochet there and a puff stitch behind that. So it's always worked double crochet, puff stitch, skip that whole section, and then again double crochet and behind that the puff stitch, and so on, so that none of your stitches will be left unworked. Every stitch will have another stitch in there, and it will always be a double crochet and a puff stitch. And always make sure, remember to chain 2 after you've made your double crochet. So I'll meet you when we're almost at the end of the round, and then I'll show you how to connect this, how to join it up, and how to start the next round. See you in a bit. Alright, so I'm almost at the end. I've worked my puff stitches. Here's my tail. And let's have a look. So I've just made a double crochet. I need to chain 2. Because now I have 1 puff stitch left to make here. And as you can see, this is the very last stitch we have. So another double crochet there, chain 2. And then I have 1 more space for my last puff stitch. So let's just do that together. Yarn over. Make my puff stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4, yarn over, 1. Now I'm going to skip 1 and then make my double crochet into the very last stitch that I have available, just like that. Chain 2, yarn over, and puff stitch 1 space before that. 4. Done. Now remember at the beginning I showed you how that chain 5 was sort of hugging this puff stitch and sort of comes out of that puff stitch. Now it looks pretty invisible at the moment, but we're going to need this because we need to join this round, and we're going to make a slip stitch into the 3rd chain of this chain. So as you can see here, you can pull on it a little bit without messing up your puff stitch, and that's where you'll have your chains. Now here's the first one, so I'm now counting from the top, and then you would count only 2, because from the bottom you would have the 3rd one, but from the top, since there were 5, it'd be in the 2nd one. 5, 4, 3, no, it'd be in the middle, obviously, sorry, I just counted wrong. So 1, 2, 3, this is the 3rd chain, and I will just go in there, oh wait, I still have a yarn over there, go in there, and make a slip stitch. So as you can see now, I've made my slip stitch into that chain that comes out of this puff stitch. Now we're also going to chain into that space, not chain, but slip stitch. So we're going to go in there, grab our yarn, and make a slip stitch. So now we're in the right position for the next round. Alright, so the next round, we are going to start, let me grab my yarn, by chaining 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. and 5. We will always start by chaining 5 throughout this entire pattern until we reach the end. So I've chained 5. Now we're going to flip our work around. So now we're going to work in the other direction, so the direction we just came from. But not yet. We're going to first work backwards again, like we always do. So let's have a look at this. We've got one puff stitch right below us. One to the left, one to the right. Now we're going to start looking at this puff stitch right here. So one to the right of the one below you. So let's just focus on this section right here. Now this is the puff stitch, and on top of that you see the chain. This is the chain 2. That was here, the double crochet, chain 2, and then that puff stitch. And this gap right there is where we're going to make our very first puff stitch. So have a look at your work and be absolutely sure where you're going to work that stitch. There is actually only one real option here, the puff stitch and that chain there. Now in the beginning you didn't maybe really see it, that's why you always need to pull your work apart a little bit and then you'll see where to go. So I'm going to yarn over and I'm going to go into that space. Now the moment you go into that space, it almost feels like you're working over this chain and this chain, and that's correct because we're working back on ourselves. You're going to go pretty much underneath the chain 2 and under the first chain 5 that you've made. But that will go automatically, this one. You don't have to do anything extra for that. So yarn over, pull it through, and now you're going to make that puff stitch. So I already did 1, 2, 3, 4. Just finish off that puff stitch. Right. So let's look at our work again. We started above this puff stitch right here. That's where we made our chain 5. And then we went over to the one to the right. Now we're going to skip this one and look at the one on the left here. So we're always going to skip one puff stitch and then go to the next one. And again, if you pull at it a little bit, you see that on top of that puff stitch, there's that chain 2 space again. And that's where we're going to make our first double crochet this time. So yarn over. Let me really make that very clear. There's that space. And make your double crochet. Alright, and then you're going to chain 2, as always. You always chain 2 after a double crochet. And now we finally can go to that one in the middle, that puff stitch that we haven't used yet. And also on top of that, there will be that space. And that is that first space that your first chain 5 came out of, which is hidden right there, underneath that puff stitch. So let's look again. This is the first one we worked right here. We skipped this one, and then we went to this one to make our double crochet. Chain 2. Now we're going to go back to that one in the middle, and right above that puff stitch there is that space. So yarn over, and that's where we're going to make our next puff stitch. I'm going to go underneath, yarn over. So we're going to do this 4 times. Let me just grab my yarn. 2, 3, 4. And finish that off. Now you've made another puff stitch. So now we're going to repeat in this manner. So we just made this one, skip the next one, so we're above this one right here, skip the next one, and we'll look at the next one. And again, pull at it a little bit, and there that chain will appear. You will see it. That's where you're going to make a double crochet. Double crochet, chain 2, and now I find it gets easier now, because we've already worked here. We made our double crochet, and now we need to go back one, and already that space is pretty much appearing. And it is appearing because earlier we made a double crochet into that space before we made this puff stitch. So it's pulling already the chain 2 apart a little bit, which means it's very easy to make our puff stitch into that space, which is what we're going to do right now. 2, 3, 4, pull through all loops except for 1, and pull through 2. And we've made another puff stitch. Again, we're here now above this one. We're going to skip this one and go to the next one. And again, there is that chain. Yarn over, go in, and make a double crochet. So whenever you work towards the left, you make a double crochet, and whenever you go to the right, you make a puff stitch. Chain 2, and let's look again. Already that space is pretty much showing itself to you. Like you have to go in there for the next puff stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4. Puff stitch done. Again, we're going to skip the next one and look at the chain. You can literally pull right next to it and already it will show. Yarn over and make a double crochet there. Chain 2, and again a puff stitch in that space before. Keep on going like this until you're at the end of this round, and you will probably notice when you get to the end, because you'll be like, where am I going to make my next double crochet? Because it seems like you're out of spaces to go into. Once we get there, I will show you what to do. So I'll see you back in a sec. Alright, so we're almost at the end. You can tell because here's where the double section is starting. I've just made a double crochet. I'm going to chain 2. Make a puff stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. Puff stitch. And now you'll be like, where am I going to put my next double crochet? Because we skipped one and then you would normally go in the chain 2 space above this one. Well, there's already a puff stitch coming out of that. And that is correct. To join this up, you're going to make your double crochet into the same space as where the puff stitch is coming out of. So right there, we're going to go in and make a double crochet. Just like that. Chain 2, and now we've got 1 puff stitch left to make, otherwise we would miss one. Yarn over into that gap, just like normal. 2, 3, 4. Puff stitch, and now we're going to join this up. And again, that chain will be hidden a little bit. There it is. Underneath that puff stitch. So just pull it out a little. And again you can count 1, 2, 3. Make a slip stitch. And then also slip stitch into that space. Now, you probably want to, you don't have to, but you can change color at this point. I always think it's nicest to change color after 2 rows and not every row, because I think it almost looks like a braid at this point. And that just works best if you change color every 2 rows. So what I would do now is just make another chain. Then I would snip my yarn. And pull out the loop on my hook. And really pull it very snug. And then I would grab my next color of yarn, which in this case is going to be a darker gray. There we go, I've got my next color. So what I would do now, I always like to make knots, especially for something like this where it won't be obvious at the end. Knots are very strong. And I will still sew in the ends at the end, but I do like to make a knot. I just make it as close as I can to the original spot. Make it really tight. Alright, there we go. So, look again, this is where we made that slip stitch into this space right there. Now grab my hook and pull the new color through and chain 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. By the way, this is the right side of your work at the moment. So whenever you finish the second row of puff stitches that's facing you, that will be the right side of your work. There is not a very big difference between the right and the wrong side of your work. I just prefer this side, so you can still choose your own side at the end. Because honestly, it looks very similar. I don't know, I just have a good feeling about this side. So I take this as the right side of my work. Now, you've chained 5, now you're going to turn your work over again, turn it around. So here you'll have the ends hanging towards you. And they're going to be in the way a little bit in 1 second, but don't worry about them yet. So let's look again. We're going to do exactly the same as the last round. I will just show you just one more time, because now there are some ends hanging here. And it will actually be easier now that we have a new color in our work, because it will show you even better where to make your stitches. So ignore this one right below you. We'll go to the one behind, and then if you pull it apart a little again, there is that chain 2 space right there. Yarn over and make a puff stitch right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, puff. Now we're going to skip the next one and look at this one. And again, that chain space is right there. You're going to make your double crochet and chain 2. Now from here on out, it will be a little bit easier every time. So this is where we joined our yarn into that space right there. And that's also where the first chain 5 came out of. And that will be the very space where you're going to make your next puff stitch. So that's quite easy to see actually. Yarn over and make that puff stitch, ignoring all those ends hanging there. Puff. Now you skip the next one, as always. Make a double crochet into the next space, the chain 2 space above that puff stitch. Chain 2. And now, like I said, it's easier because we have another color of yarn. There is that double crochet pulling on this chain 2 loop. And that's the very loop where you'll make your next puff stitch. Oops. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops, one too many. Puff stitch. And now you're going to keep on going in the same manner. So you always skip one, and then in that chain loop there, you'll make a double crochet, chain 2, and then again, that loop is already there for you. And this, because the double crochet is pulling at it, and that's the very loop you're going to make your next puff stitch. 3, 4. And you're going to keep on going like this until you reach the very end. And then once you get to that point, you will again find that you'll have one more double crochet left to make, and it'll be in that same space as where the first puff stitch comes out of. And then also that chain, which is right here, just pull it apart a little, that's where you'll make a slip stitch at the end of that round. Then at the end you will chain 5 again, turn your work and do the same thing again. After which you will change color again if you'd like to. And you keep on going like that until you're happy with the length of your cowl. And I like to do 5 sections of these. So I always do, for example, light gray, darker gray, black, darker gray, light gray. And then once you've done all that, I'll meet you at the end and I'll show you how to make the very last round of half double crochet stitches. Good luck and happy crocheting. Isn't this fun? Alright everyone, as you can see, I'm almost done with my cowl. Now I'm at the very end of my last round of puff stitches. I just made one, which means I've got to make my last... Oh, my hook is the wrong way in. There we go. So I just have to make my last double crochet into the same gap as that first puff stitch. So, chain 2, and then I have to make my very last puff stitch into the gap right there. 1, 2, 3, 4. Done. Alright, now I'm ready to slip stitch into the third chain of my chain 3. Chain 5. Right there. Done. Alright, but we're not completely done yet. Now we're going to chain 2. So we're not going to turn our work. We're going to stay on this side because this is the right side that is facing us at the moment. Chain 2. And now you are going to make a half double crochet on top of that first puff stitch. So as you can see, there's 2 loops like a V shape on top of that puff stitch. And that's where you're going to make your first half double crochet. The next half double crochet you're going to make into the gap between these 2 puff stitches. So you're not going to go into the stitch, but you're literally going to go underneath and make a half double crochet. Now the next one again, let me get some yarn, is going to be on top of the puff stitch. So you can pull on it a little bit, and then you'll see right there, there's the stitch. Right there. And again, in between, so literally in that big gap right there, make a half double crochet right on top. Underneath 2 loops, you make your half double crochet. And again, in between and on top. Now keep on going like this until you reach the very beginning of the round, so until you reach the chain 2 right here. So the last one will be on top of this puff stitch, and then you will join with a slip stitch into the second chain of that chain 2. And then I'll see you once we get there, so we can fasten off together. See you in a sec. Alright, so I've made my last half double crochet on top of this puff stitch, and now all that's left to do is join with a slip stitch on top of the chain 2. I was chain 1, then grab your scissors, and now I just pull it out, tighten it, and then all that's left to do is sew in the ends. And there you've got yourself a wonderful crisscross puff stitch cowl. So I hope this was very clear for you guys. If you still have any questions, then don't hesitate to contact me. Write me a message, or go to our website boysandbunting.com, and there will be a contact form there, and write to us. Also, I would recommend, if you don't get something, rewatch the video a couple of times, just to be really clear about it, because sometimes the first time you don't see exactly what you're meant to see, because it might be a little overwhelming with some of the stitches. But once you get the hang of it, it really isn't all that difficult, and you'll find yourself just crocheting along. You'll recognize all the spaces where you have to go, and you'll be making these cowls a lot. And they're really squishy, they're soft, they are double-sided, I'd say, once you've sewn in all the ends. I've got all my ends on the inside at the moment. I still need to sew them in. I need to put a nice label on them. And then I'm totally happy. So thank you so much for buying my pattern. Thank you for watching, and happy hooking. Bye-bye.